Welcome, everyone.
Hey,
You
everybody.
probably know me. I'm Elle Griffin, and I write
I'm
the
Glenn
links.
Weyl. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, do you want to officially introduce yourself? Tell everyone more about yourself.
Sure, I'm Glenn. I am at Microsoft. I'm actually physically at the Microsoft office in the Boston area right now. And I've founded a bunch of nonprofits and written books, all of which sort of focus on the intersection between technology and advanced forms of social organization. How can we use technology as like a tool to help us remake democracy and economies and uh, increasingly how it relates to religion and the role that religion can play in technology. So,
Wow, cool. Yeah, I think I came into your work through one of your organizations, Radical Exchange, which kind of has all these innovative ways that we can kind of the way I put it is like disrupt democracy to be more efficient and better. And I'm also a big fan of the publication it puts out, Combinations.
oh, cool.
I have
Awesome.
to
I'm glad
print
you
the
like
print
that.
copy.
That's great.
And I then, of course, found your book, Plurality.
I can hold up a copy of that. I've got one in my
Yes,
backpack here. There we go. Oops, that's the bad.
alongside. There it
Yeah,
is.
plurality.
Yes, Plurality. So good. Um, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and I think how I came to your work was just this exactly this idea that democracies feels incredibly messy to people, and it feels incredibly messy right now, especially as we've created these really giant democracies like the United States, and where a lot of people very much disagree. And I think it's causing this weird backlash of people being like, well, why don't we just get rid of democracy and then things will be nice and clean and we won't have all of the problems with democracy, which always struck me as a very bad idea. And that's how I came to your work to be like, okay, well, if we want democracy, that doesn't mean it needs to be democracy as it is right now. And in fact, maybe we can come up with some better ideas that include a lot of democratic choice and a lot of public feedback, even as it's a little bit more efficient and not so crazy as it is today. Um, that's my my version of coming into your work. I know you probably have a different version of it, but that's the part I get really excited about. Um, and I guess I wanted to start with by asking you a question about your recent debate on this topic because I attended online an event you did with Curtis Yarvin, which was a debate that the premise of it was should the U.S. have a CEO dictator? And he was like, yes, and you were like, no. And here's the reasons why. But there were so many things in this conversation that struck me, and we kind of ended up having a little like blue sky conversation after it, being like some of the things he's like saying as autocracies are like actually less autocratic than he's like saying they are, and are actually more democratic than he's thinking they are.
Yeah.
And one of the things at one point you pointed that out because um, he said that companies are the ideal work structure. And they're authoritarian.
Yeah.
Therefore, governments should be authoritarian because that's the best structure. And then he lists a bunch of companies, and he's like, they're all authoritarian. And you're like, actually, Microsoft has been a lot better now that they have a less authoritarian leader and have incorporated a lot of democratic choice into companies. And in fact, companies do have a lot of input coming in from a lot of the people that are part of them. They're not pure autocracies, as you pointed out. So I wanted to see if you would talk a little bit more about democratic participation as it pertains to corporations as like a starting point.
Yeah. Well, um, there's, actually this whole movement that people can look up. There's a book called The Interaction Field, another book called The Humanocracy, which is all about how corporate organizations work better if they find like thoughtful ways to incorporate both employee and broader stakeholder participation and feedback. And that's how they build the sense of community, as well as lots of, their most valuable ideas. So Lego is probably the most famous example of this. like a very large chunk of all the like Legos coming out are actually created by the community, and the community receives rewards. People find the like they learn they form these groups online that participate and like jointly create Lego designs. Open source world is obviously another great example of that, and that's how we wrote that book. We actually had 100 people about from around the world contributing text and judging the quality of other people's contributions and so forth. So, lots of different areas of the world work that way. And yes, there's like a shell we put around things, and usually there's like a CEO nominally in charge because that's really good from a perspective of like accounting and so forth. And there are companies that do work in more dictatorial or hierarchical ways. But even if you look at some of the people that Mr. Yarvin hangs out with a lot, like the Palantir folks, Alex Karp has a book, a large chunk of which is all about how sort of hierarchical command and control structures are precisely what Silicon Valley moved away from, and that the problem with government is precisely that it has too many of those, and that they sort of like flat, flexible formations are actually critical to what has made Silicon Valley work. So it's it's kind of a strange perspective to be getting from someone who's actually never worked at a successful corporation to be talking about how great and dictatorial corporations are when in fact, um, you know, I- like I'm not sure he'd want to be at an organization that was like that. And it seems like he wouldn't want to be because he hasn't worked at any of those places. So yeah. Oop, are you muted? I can't hear you.
Sorry, there was some there was loud noise by me.
Okay.
Um, uh, yeah, having worked for some of those organizations myself, and I worked in San Francisco for a while at various tech firms, and I think that there 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 is like a hierarchy in terms of people are making decisions, and there's like a final decision maker. But everybody is participating so much. There are like board meetings, there's everyday meetings, there's talking to every single person at the office. There's brainstorming sessions, there's meetings with where ideation is happening. Like it's not like one person is just like, here's the whole rule for the whole company, and this is what it has to be. If they were bad at that, they would be fired for their job. So
Yeah. Well, and in fact, I think there's a lot that democracies can learn from some of the actually quite, I don't know if you were democratic, but pluralistic principles that are very common in the corporate world. So like when you have a really important meeting in the corporate world, it's not democratic in the sense that people have elected representatives. It's not democratic in the sense that a lot of people in the like democracy innovation space say, if like we get a random sample of people. Instead, what it tends to be is like you carefully choose to make sure that you have stakeholders from all the relevant disciplines and organizations. And actually, I think that would be a great way for a lot of democracies to organize themselves, rather than just think about it as like being flat or like electing representatives. Instead, think about what are the different social groups that are involved and making sure that you have balance across them so you can reach like a reasonable consensus. So actually, a lot of the things that I work on include ways of like imagining democracy to be based more on those, what I would call like pluralistic principles of representing all the differences rather than just flat notions of one person, one vote.
yeah, that's interesting. So, how do you think about what are the specific things companies do that you think democracies should then follow or copy?
Well, I mean, one practice that at least at Microsoft, and I don't know every company, but we have a lot of training about like sort of respectful dialogue and turn taking and how to make sure that you hear from the people who may have relevant expertise but may not have the same like interactive norms as everyone else. So I think that's a really valuable skill that applies a lot in democratic settings, and that is not always as intentionally taught, like to Congress people coming in, for example.
Yeah, Marty just commented, my experience of Silicon Valley is that company cultures are highly interactive. I would have to second
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I'm sure every company is different, right? I mean, and of course there's things to learn from the successes and failures of all sorts of different companies, but certainly that's been my experience, like or somewhere like one of very successful company, GitHub is very known for having a sort of holocratic participatory culture. And there's a lot to learn from cultures like that.
Yeah, I had another guest lecture on it for the Elysian with Salim Ismail. Are you familiar with his work at
No,
all?
no.
So he focuses on I think his book is called like exponential organizations or something like that.
Mm,
And he specifically studies companies that are the most successful and are the most innovative. And he says they're also coincidentally very innovative, usually in their hierarchical structure.
mm.
And one of the main companies he studied was Hire, this
Oh
organization.
yeah, yeah. Hire is very famous for this stuff. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, the
exactly.
interaction field talks about hire as well. It's another book that covers that.
Oh, cool. Okay.
As does
Yeah.
humanocracy. I guess it's a very common example for these kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the premise is they turned the appliance company that turned 80,000 person company, which was hierarchical, into 2,000 teams of 40 people each, and
Yeah.
then kind of gave them full autonomy.
Yeah.
And I liked this quote. Each team has a P&L target, elects their own leader, and decides what they want to do. So they're essentially
Yeah.
creating a bunch of small democracies rather than a large autocracy.
Yeah.
Democracy in the sense that they have autonomy and they're choosing, they have self-determination.
Yeah.
So this is an example of companies doing things a little bit differently and giving more autonomy to workers and thus creating good results.
Yeah. Well, and I think those are really interesting. And I would also say there's a limit to that notion of just breaking things up, each having them have a P&L, because then they don't necessarily cooperate across as much. And so then the question is, I would ideally like to get towards even more dynamic organizations than that. Ones where there are, yes, internal democracies, and then also incentives for cooperating across those internal units that are themselves sort of horizontally democratic, getting away from, getting more towards a network and away from just like a org chart that can be cleanly broken up into chunks.
Do you have a company in mind as an example of that?
Well, I mean, certainly Microsoft culturally tries to encourage that. We have this whole One Microsoft campaign that tries to get at that. And I think a lot of companies, um, Apple being a great example, try to like have designs of physical space that encourage that kind of linkage. But I'd love to get to more formal mechanisms that can create incentives to do that kind of thing. Like, one thing I've often thought about is like Google has this 20% time or whatever that you get to just kind of do your own thing. But the problem with that is maybe you go off and do something that doesn't relate to what anyone else is doing. So I would love instead to have something where like maybe you get like 1% time, but then if you find people from other parts of the company really far away from you who want to work on a project together, then it gets matched by HQ and you end up getting like 30% time. And, you know, so like some kind of a mechanism that encourages people who are in very different parts of the organization to work together.
That's interesting. My husband's company kind of does that. Well, he works in sales, and his previous company would incentivize each individual salesperson, give them a sales goal,
Yeah.
and they have to reach, and then they get bonuses based on it. But obviously, that means every sales guy has their own territory and is thus
Yeah.
fighting for customers within the same company.
Yeah.
His new organization has a goal for the entire sales team as a whole. And if the entire sales team as a whole meets that goal, then they all get bonuses. So in this case, it doesn't matter whose customer it is, they're all trying to get more customers. So
Yeah,
they're
so
working
so
together.
that's like a collective versus a individual level. And I think the thing that excites me is things that are more networked, where you don't have to have one or the other, where you can sort of
Okay.
have the ability to flexibly form teams and get, greater incentive for getting to like, greater groups, but it doesn't like necessarily predetermine this is your team and whatever. So it allows for more dynamism.
How would you do that?
Well, I mean, one structure that is, it's just for one thing, but like I have this design quadratic voting, and quadratic voting is quadratic funding is one where like, you create common goods, and the more people who contribute to something, the more matching funds there are. So you like if there's many, many individual contributors, it will get matched much more than if there's one person contributing all of it. That gives you an incentive to form a team, but it doesn't prejudge what the team is. You just have to go out and find those people. But you can do things even more interesting than that. Like you can have different organizations, and then you can give the matching funds if people are contributing from different organizations or different states or different racial groups or different political perspectives. One thing I often suggest is that like if it's only one political party supporting a piece of legislation, it might take like 70% to pass it. But if it's equal amount from the two political parties, then you can pass with 50%. And then you can imagine even more dynamic versions of that, where it's like the more that you're voting with someone you've never voted with before, the more sort of bonus votes that that proposal gets. So that the most power goes to the people who are able to work with the people most different from them.
Yeah, this is the part of your book that really confused me.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to confuse people.
Quadratic voting and quadratic budgeting. I read
Yeah.
both a lot about both concepts
Yeah.
in your book and then outside sources as well. And I still, at the end of the day, was like, I really don't understand how voting is happening.
Yeah.
Is there like an easier way? Like, is there an
Well,
example of
it,
something that
it's
I
it's
can?
much it's much more useful if you do it in a tactile way. If you go online, there's all kinds of like really easy to use quadratic voting apps. Or if you play Civilization 6 Gathering Storm Edition, you'll like
Oh,
experience it.
oh,
Um, and yeah, the basic you just like you have a little pool of credits at the top. You allocate them on issues or topics, and you'll see that as you like put more votes on something, every additional vote is more expensive than the last one. Um, and so you're able to say how much you care, but it's like you have to really care in order to be able to say you care more.
yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so in like a monopoly money kind of situation, I have a certain amount of monopoly dollars I can spend on whatever issues are most important to me. And I can divvy them out equally among all the issues that are important to me. But if there's one that's really important to me and I can put all my money on it, it it's that total is worth less than if I had contributed it to all the other
Exactly.
things. Okay. Okay.
And
Got
often it works in reverse. Often people are just like, no, no, this is my one thing. I'm going to put everything on it. And then they notice, oh gosh, if I take one away from that, I can like influence a little bit on everything else. Why don't I do that? And
Yeah.
then they sort of gradually sort it out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do like that. Yeah, it makes everything you have to it makes everybody want to have a say in more things, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. I like that. Um, I do want to apply the company model to countries, and the country
Yeah.
everybody does this with is Singapore.
Yeah.
Um, they're the classic like run like a company kind of model, and I'm actually a huge fan of Lee Kuan Yew's book because it was like it was like he wrote a like how I founded this startup book, and only it was
Yeah.
like a country, and
Yeah.
it's such a wild book. But um, it's an interesting one because Yarvin uses it as proof that it's an autocracy works. And then what another one of my favorite writers, Prag Khanna, is like, yeah, it's an autocracy, but it literally has more democratic choice than any other country on the planet. And then
Well, even more than that, the thing I would highlight about Singapore that I think really throws through a loop people like Curtis and Balaji Srinivasan,
yeah,
who like, you know, if there's like one thing that like unites the right now, it's like hatred of DEI. And I think that one thing that you can say with like very, very high confidence is that there is nowhere that has more complete, rigorous, and like penetrating every element of life DEI than does Singapore. Singapore, like literally, like almost everything is structured in a way to make sure that there's social harmony. Like the housing, the schooling, like everything is about balanced understanding of the cultures and balanced interaction with people from different cultural backgrounds. So, it's an interesting choice because to the extent they're a autocracy, one of the main things that autocracy is in service of is, balance.
Yeah, and I think, and on the one hand, they kind of have to do that because they're an island, and they're if something goes wrong, then it affects them all really fast.
Yeah.
And we've kind of seen that. From kind of what the future is Asian, he talks about like all the ways that the government is taking in that data to make those decisions. And he says it's, from passport checks and public toilets at the airport to banks and university and administrative buildings. Singapore is populated with touchscreen tablets asking you to rate every service you've ever been a part of. And the government is actually paying attention to the results. And he says citizens comment vocally on everything from taxes to transportation to healthcare spending. And if the National Pensions Fund portfolio returns just 1% lower than expected, citizens will start to howl. And I kind of got this sense when my husband and I went last year. And yeah, there's so many opportunities to provide feedback literally everywhere. You're on the subway and you can provide feedback. You're on the streets, you can provide feedback. There's so many like surveys. And this is why he calls the country a technocracy, because they're just pulling in all this data, and then they're using that to make judgments about what needs to happen in the country. Um, Now, I don't feel like you would call, there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't call this a democracy, and yet there's also a lot of reasons why people would have a lot of say, and because the country is working in their best interest. So I'm curious, like, how do you set this divide? Are we talking about autocracy here, or are we talking about democracy here? And what is the lesson to learn from Singapore?
Well, I think it's a really fascinating question. And it's like actually kind of a philosophical one. So like if you have a country that's getting a huge amount of data on citizens and that is acting on it, is that a democracy by construction or not? And let me ask like an adjacent question to like ponder that, which is, Elle, do you know what the first uh, drawing in human history that I'm aware of that looks roughly like a recombinant neural network is?
No.
It was the graph of how they did voting in the 13th century Venice for the Doge, the OG Doge, not our Doge, but the Doge of Venice. And uh, the reason is that what they would do is that people would elect members of a bunch of councils, which would in turn elect members of a bunch of councils, which would in turn elect members of a bunch of councils and eventually elect the Doge. And so it looks like a neural network. There's like all these like common, nodes and, you know, anyway. So was that a democracy? Was that a black box AI model before its time? Um, yes, I guess, So like, uh, I guess I think like, what distinguishes the government is surveilling people and taking actions based on that surveillance, and people have democratic control over the government. Um, Another similar question, maybe it sounds even more different, but also similar, is like you have an avatar in virtual reality. When is that avatar you, and when are you watching something happen? Um, and what the theorists of virtual reality stuff would say is it's a matter of feedback and control. So like if you feel you can control that avatar enough, and if you get enough sort of visual and haptic feedback, you start to feel it's a part of yourself. And in fact, like you can have people have tails in virtual reality controlled by leads on the back of their neck. And like 95% of people come to feel that they just have a tail and that they're literally just moving their tail muscles. Because we have like vestigial instincts that like rewire your brain very quickly to like control a tail, no matter what the, input mechanism is. Um, so I guess this is all a roundabout way of saying to me, what ultimately distinguishes like a technocracy from a sophisticated form of democracy is how much sort of feeling of understanding there is of the way in which whatever you're doing leads to outcomes and the way in which like those outcomes are then fed back to you, right? Um, and ultimately, like I think the reason why we feel that there's this AI and we're scared of an AI making decisions for us, rather than that we feel that like actually the AI is training on our data and we can actually make the AI do things by what we're doing and we're contributing to this collective intelligence has to do with our ability to like understand the operation of that system, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So this is interesting. You bring up the difference between a kind of technocracy versus a technologically intelligent democracy. Um, I guess I'm kind of thinking of them the same way. But is there a difference that you would distinguish? You're kind of
Well, yeah, I mean, here's a totally different scenario that I would, call our attention to. So if you compare the American industrial model to the Japanese Kaizen industrial model, which ended up totally outcompeting it in the 20th century, um, uh, the key difference was not they both had assembly lines, but the core idea of the Japanese model, which relied on a very educated workforce, was that you would try to give people an understanding of where whatever like thing they were doing on the assembly line fit into the overall production of the vehicle or whatever it was. Toyota was most famous for doing this, because then they could detect things that were happening in their process that might cause downstream problems and suggest improvements. And of course, they got like many improvements every day. So there was a process of continually improving the Toyota production process because every line engineer, every line worker felt empowered to like see a way to make the system better, And that created um, much more agency for participants, much less alienation from the process, and it created much greater productivity because it wasn't just you were doing the thing, you were part of making it better, you know?
okay. So there was also like we're learning and we're growing and we're evolving over time versus just
Yeah.
the static. Okay. That makes sense. I think what's interesting in both cases is that we're talking about a lot of input from citizens, but it doesn't necessarily look like representative democracy.
Yeah.
We might not be talking about representative democracy at all. Um,
Yeah. And there you get the real trade-off because like I actually think representative democracy is a really simplistic, limited, not really great way of doing democratic feedback. And on the other hand, we have stories that we've told about it and understandings we've come to have of it over generations, which mean that there's a lot of collective self-awareness of what's going on in that, which does create that kind of agency for people. And so the question is, can we combine those? Can we create more, you know, interesting forms of participation and yet not have them be black boxes, have them be things that people feel agency through so that they have the incentive and the empowerment and the reason to participate and improve them.
so do you think we could completely replace representative democracy with a technically advanced democracy? Or
Uh,
democracy?
Eventually, I think we can do massively better than what we're doing right now in all kinds of dimensions. There can be more deliberation. There can be more, direct citizen participation. There can be more, um, uh, you know, representation not just by geographic districts. Even if we have representative democracy, we could represent people by like clusters of perspective that really need to be heard, just like in a company, not just by where they physically are. So, like, all of those are really interesting. I mean, there's so many interesting directions to go in. And I don't think it's necessarily about replacement any more than like, have we replaced the physical human by all the ways in which we've used medicine to extend human life? I don't think so. We've evolved it, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think we've replaced people with corporations. People are part of corporations, you know.
Yeah, I think my perspective on representative democracy at the moment is just that it was great for when democracy was invented, and maybe that was our best mode of representation. But now we have kind of direct access to everybody all the time and could provide a lot more input and a lot more say without trying to direct it through a person who might not represent us at all.
Well, I mean, Thomas Jefferson would agree with you. He's, you know, if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, it says that, um, you know, while he's not a big believer in revolutions, it would be as senseless for our, um, descendants to use the Constitution of the barbarous past that we represent, as it would be for a grown man to wear the coat that was made for him as a child. So.
Yeah, it's time to adapt it. Over time to adapt it. Um, oh, you made me think of a question. Oh, have you read Ada Palmer's work at all?
I have. I have to say, I love her ideas, and I find it really hard to follow her writing, even though
I know.
I just like literally, I find I have to read it incredibly slowly to like actually
Yeah.
follow what's going on. But the concepts there are fabulous, and especially what I value about her is how she combines futurism with like a deep respect for the past,
Yes.
and doesn't see those in conflict, but instead sees them sort of supporting each other, which I think is so valuable, you know.
Yes, absolutely. And I think my favorite part of the book is one of the governments is called the Cousins, and their form of government is an online suggestion box. And any citizen at any time can type in anything they want there from we need to change the way we do taxes to we need a mural in this park to we need playground equipment in this neighborhood. And the suggestion box is just like an AI that collates all the responses, sees where the most important ones are, like puts them in prioritization. And then their government is essentially a large community of volunteers that then goes and tackles all those tasks
Yeah.
and puts them together. And so this is always kind of my framework for understanding the programs in Taiwan, the participatory democracy platforms, where we kind of are taking in lots of data and responses from citizens and then trying to make sense of them and organize it into
Yeah.
a set of feedback or suggestions for the government. But I like that concept of we don't need to call my senator and then my senator gets a million voice messages that he's not going to listen to and go try to make a decision in Congress because he needs to because that's what's going to get him elected. We can just directly type in our feedback and it can be just like publicly known what everybody is saying. There could be a pulse on the situation.
And that's very much happening now in Japan, in the Team Mirai, in the Tokyo 2050 plan, in Democracy 2030, in the Democratic Party for the People. So yeah,
Can you
even
talk
more than
about
in
that?
Taiwan. Yeah. Well, so there's this book that you mentioned that I wrote with Audrey, and it was done sort of democratically by people around the world. And a good chunk of the people who participated, maybe 20-25%, were in Japan. And one of the guys who did was a 33-year-old science fiction writer with long hair, which is very uncommon for a man in Japan. And he ended up running for governor of Tokyo using the ideas. And he came in fifth with about 3% of the vote. And then went on to found a new political party that he got elected. He became one of the new parties, officially recognized parties in Japan. I got a seat in the upper house of the legislature, and the largest opposition party also adopted a whole bunch of his tools. And so now there's this increasing, wave in Japan of using all of these creative ways. And he also was, for a while, the head of the long-term planning for the region of Tokyo. So yeah, it's become really important part of the political culture there to do exactly that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is really fascinating to me. Yeah, when I read about that story, and then also there was a follow up in the kind of your combinations magazine about another Japanese politician who used like GitHub to gather
Yeah, no,
feedback.
that's the same guy. That's
Oh, same
Anotaka
guy.
Hero. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay, same guy. Yeah, that's so fascinating. Because you're getting direct feedback from everybody that's
yeah,
voting for you and telling you exactly what they want. And you're just designing your policies based on that. It makes so much
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, the book Parag Khanna wrote about technocracies, he says that the two most technocratic nations in the world are Singapore and Switzerland, and the kind of ways that he poses it is like take your pick. Switzerland might be considered more autocratic, and Singapore might be Singapore might be more autocratic, and Switzerland might be considered more democratic. But both ultimately do this same function where they're constantly checking the pulse of the citizens and then making decisions based on that. And you might not and you might not even be able to distinguish between the two if you're just a citizen on the ground participating in it. And as far as how the governance function. Um, I was curious if you think, uh, uh, and of both, I liked this quote. He says, both use a shift from government knows best to crowdsourcing, which is essentially
yeah,
the Japanese model you were just talking about.
yeah.
How do you see this playing out? Or should all governments try to pick up these tools, these platforms? Is this happening online? Like, how do we actually implement this?
Um, yeah. So, uh, there's a lot of different um sort of structures and approaches. There's a comment in here about um the pirate parties. I think one really important element to doing these things well is to have a more sophisticated democratic mechanisms. So, one thing that we really have emphasized in Taiwan and elsewhere is that it's not enough to just like have people participate and vote on things. You actually want to reach consensus across social divides because if you're not like bringing people together in surprising new ways, then things can just become either a shouting match of the loudest or like a popularity contest. So you have to really give the incentive to hear the things that bring people together. There's so many incentives in our current environment to actually do the opposite, that like the only way you can build a large audience is by just getting people angry enough. Um, and then you just like sort of create an incentive for all this conflict. And then in the end, like people compromise. Um, because it's the only way to get something done. But like you've ended up wasting all this energy that people could be using, coming up with creative new solutions to just get people really angry and then come back to the same compromise you had in the beginning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just not a very productive way to move conversations forward. So I think you need platforms that have opposite incentives to that. Platforms that can recognize the different opinions out there and very quickly find things that bridge across them, which allows you then to discover the next conflicts and bridge across those and just move forward very rapidly. And that's what they did in this Polis platform in Taiwan. They do it. It was adopted by Community Notes on X. So it's spread a lot. And yeah, I think that that's a really key element to this. And it is very much recognized in Singapore, as I mentioned. They recognize all these different social groups, and then they deliberately try to bridge across them. And the more dynamically we can do that, I think the more creative solutions we can get out.
Yeah. Kumar kind of added to that point. He said this much
Yeah,
democracy
yeah, that's what I was
requires
reading his point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
requires people to invest a lot of time in making informed decisions and communicating their opinions. How does one ensure citizens have time to participate intelligently? And that is interesting because I can't really from reading about the Polis platform in Taiwan, I can't really get a sense for how people participate. I can kind of I you know you can kind of hear case studies and examples of people using it, but um, does it require all of us, logging onto the platform and then like getting in debates and like
They
spending all
do.
our
They do.
time?
And I do think that that is like a limitation of both Polis and also Community Notes. Like it depends on people to just be very internally motivated. I would love to see some extrinsic motivation as well tied to the structures themselves. So like right now people can really make a living by like, being outrageous, polarizing people, building an audience, digging deeper, deeper into that audience. But what if instead you could just earn a lot more by being able to bridge to some broader community and being the person who like finds a way to somehow make a coalition across surprising differences work, you know? So I think we can have that same engine that we have for generating content, but turned towards different incentive structures.
Yeah, I'm into that. At one point in Plurality, you actually list a bunch of different ways that this could happen. You kind of like a list of various voting options, and one of them was predictive voting. One of them was assisted real-time voting. Some of these ideas, I felt really interested in because predictive voting, especially in my head, just makes it seem like the government should be able to know what I want, whether or not I participate online in this poll, because theoretically, if you have enough data, Amazon knows what I want to buy, or my Whole Foods account could fill my cart for me because it's just like, here's all the things you normally buy, add them all to your cart. There could theoretically be a construct in which you can catch the pulse of a community without even their full undivided participation in an online platform, right? What are some of
Yeah.
these other
And,
options?
and there's some real dangers to that because, if you have the machine go ahead and exercise for you, somehow it doesn't quite build your muscles. So like you don't want that to become an excuse for people not um, actually educating themselves. And because if you do allow those muscles to atrophy, then the data that goes into the machine will be crap, and then the machine won't do a good job predicting things. You see what I mean? So you need to like simultaneously use those extensions of people's capacities and have that just increase the value that's placed on getting the best, highest quality data that then really allows the machine to do the best job of making those predictions and thereby gives incentives to people to do the thought that's necessary to produce those things. So you need all those things going on at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll atrophy the people and the machine will ultimately fail as a result of that.
Right. I think what I thought was interesting was most recently the park near my house is completely being redone, and I went online to see they were proposing three different plans for the park, and we could all vote on them and provide feedback on them. But the three plans that they made and were proposing to us, they already had a significant amount of data to be able to make those without us even participating, because they know the pool gets used a ton. We should expand the pool. The volleyball courts are booked every single night of the week. Let's add a volleyball court. The horseshoe courts never get used. Let's scrap them and then maybe try like a bocce ball court. Or the tennis courts are like constantly booked up. The pond, there's a track around the pond where there's not a sidewalk because everybody walks there, so they can see they need to put a sidewalk in there.
Yeah.
So there's a certain amount of predictive ability that they can do, even as it's still helpful for me to log on and say, like, I know the pool doesn't seem like it's being used a lot, but I use it every single day in the summer, and to beat the heat for those of us, on a hot summer day, it's like very imperative. And you
Well,
can
it's
kind of,
also really useful to help people imagine together.
yeah,
Like one thing that we talk about in the book that I would love to see more of is sort of uh, collaborative, deliberative, uh, prompt-based VR, where you're like you put yourself, you're in the park and you put on a VR headset now, or an AR headset, and now you can see things changing around you, and you can talk about designs and what those would imply together, and experience it, and then you know use that as a computer augmented design collective deliberation tool.
yeah, I'm into that. Yeah, one of the things I proposed in the survey was like, one of the things you haven't mentioned that doesn't exist currently in the park is, why not put a cafe in where everyone can sit and have a cup of coffee and watch the kids play on the playground, like a European, park
Yeah.
might have. Um, so I like the idea of you should be able to add to the process and contribute to it as a citizen, and being able to to collaborate and brainstorm, but you could theoretically do both, right? Platforms that are predictive in nature and still have people participate in ways, right?
Well, and in fact, they can go together because people might have trouble initially brainstorming, but you could use the predictive things and some of the voice that people have to start generating ideas, and then people can react to them and they can go back and forth, towards potential designs.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so like for example, there's this guy Nikki Kidder at CMU who does this research more in an individual setting, but it's kind of like that where rather than just having like the AI design something, what happens is you have like a designer who says, well, what are different? I'm trying to make a car that's like really, really strongly protected against extreme elements. So what are some examples from nature of things that are really strongly protected? And it would be like a turtle shell. Well, there's also tanks. And I mean, here's like 20 different examples of things that exist that have strong protection from the elements. And then and then you could say, okay, that's interesting. Here's like five of them that kind of appeal to me. Can you show me what it would be for a car's structure to imitate elements of those designs in a way that would affect? And then it shows you those things. And then they could say, okay, I see what you're saying, but I want the like shape to look a little bit more like this. And then you draw on the pad and then it adapts to that. You see what I mean? So like that's like kind of a creative process that you can imagine. That's an individual level. Then you can imagine deliberating with people like and debating about it, and then it like changes in front of you and, these are the possibilities that I think we can look forward to if we learn how to integrate technology. And yeah,
I'm really into that. Okay, so there's this kind of are there's these innovations that we could up with that maybe we don't even have yet that we could still experiment with and say, you can participate in democracy whether you're doing it fully intentionally or not, or we can make it more fun to participate, or we can, there's
yeah,
a lot of different ways that people can participate. And this strikes me because even when I visited the cooperative Mondragon last fall,
yeah,
and I was talking to them and I was like, you run this whole business as a democracy. How many people actually participate in like the democracy part? And the guy I was talking to was like 15% when everything's
yeah,
going well, but when everything's not going well, 100%. Like it's
yeah,
important. Even though everybody's not participating in the day to day, like fighting over every possible thing that we could do, they want that option when it's going the way they don't want it to be able to
yeah,
step in and have a say. Um, so I think that's like an interesting point is it's not like everybody has to be participating in it all the time, but you need to be able to participate so that you can.
yeah, yeah.
Are there other innovations that you're seeing here that you think would allow people to participate either, I don't know, but without a lot of time or with a lot of time, depending on your ability?
Well, I mean, look, I think that if it were differently structured, social media is like incredible. I mean, think of how much time people are wasting on crap on social media, right?
Yeah.
And if instead they were spending that time helping solve public problems, obviously they're willing to spend that time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so much crap on social media, right? So, and presumably they'd rather have that produce something for the world rather than just anger. Um, and what if we could do that? Like, what if we could just take a small percentage of all the like heat and just channel that towards production? Like you'd have an incredible engine there, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that's kind of the concept of social listening you've talked about, right? Like
Yeah,
you could just listen to everything that's currently happening and be able to know what people are very upset about. Might be a
exactly.
little.
And people could, it's not just upset. I mean, that's just the emotional side, but people can also potentially be, playing off each other rather than like, sniping each other. They could be like, okay, and here's how we do that a little bit better. And, if the incentives were such that you really thought that if you did it, you would get attention and rewards and your thing would be used, that could be very empowering for people, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Have you seen any kind of real world case studies of any of these concepts?
Well, I mean, that is very much the type of thing that happens in the Polish environment when people are used to it and it's working well. That
In
people
the
come
what
up with very
environment?
Polis, this
Oh,
be Taiwan, Polis, yeah, because um, you know, for example, there was this issue of gay marriage in Taiwan. The Constitutional Court found that they needed to have gay marriage, but it got voted down in a referendum. So they put it through a system like this, and they like found what the fights and divisions in the population were around the issue. And the conclusion was that, like, traditional Confucian folks really wanted to have like they didn't want to be connected to another family because in Confucian tradition, like your families merge when the children get married. They wanted to
mm,
be connected to another family not through a non-traditional marriage they didn't recognize, right? So their complaint wasn't really about, gay marriage as such. It was about what implications it had for the families, right? And it turned out that a lot of the young people who wanted to get the gay marriages didn't really want their families to be, you know, snooping around in their business anyways. They wanted to kind of do it on their own. And so they created a new form of marriage that was, not implying a relationship to the family for people who are, doing same-sex unions. And of course, there's some ways in which that's kind of discriminatory and so forth. But it also actually, in some ways, split the valence because a lot of young people now wanted to have the gay marriage style marriage instead of the traditional marriage because they found it more liberating. And so it just changed the dynamic, and that came out of people trying to bridge these divides and having the incentive to do it in that kind of a platform.
how does that happen on the platform? Like, how
Basically, there are different opinion groups, and it
is it like a
people are reacting
forum?
to.
Does it look like a forum?
Well, yeah. So people basically like have these posts, and then you react to each other's posts, and then you form clusters based on those reactions, and then people who are like proposing things that are popular across the different clusters that usually are disagreeing get surfaced as like a consensual opinion.
Interesting. Okay. So like everyone's creating a bunch of post-it notes, and then we're like the ones that are doing well are getting a lot of feedback, kind of become rise up
Well,
and
first the post note gets clustered, and so
okay.
like basically the post-it notes that are popular with like certain types of people all end up together,
Okay.
and then the post-it notes that are like popular in all the different clusters then like end up in some leaderboard. Um, and so you can post in a way that tries to articulate better the position of one of the clusters, because then you'll like rise up in that cluster, or you can try to bridge across them, which will help you get onto like the global leaderboard, you know?
Okay. So it can kind of collate a bunch of ideas in together and be like, this is all kind of one idea. You need to kind of merge these into an idea.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
And then those clusters can kind of independently move up depending on what more important to people or
Well, no, I mean, it depends. Like basically, the clusters that the comments that are most sort of recognized by people within that cluster as being representing what they believe in will like come to represent that cluster. And then the things that are, bridging those clusters will come to represent the group as a whole. So it's not really about one being right or wrong. It's really about how do we most understand the landscape of like what we can act on together and what we believe in separately.
okay. Okay, cool. I think we covered broad listening, we covered quadratic voting, and a bunch of other cool things that I had not heard of. So that's exciting. Um,
Awesome.
um, okay. So then I wanted to ask you, I know this is a weird question, but if you became the king of a small city state for just 1 year, and obviously, you don't want to be the king of a small city state, but you could set it up as a fully functioning, democratically renovated city state after that. So once you're gone, it'll be like set up in your
Yeah.
stead. What would you do? Like, what would be the thing that you create?
Um, well, I think I'd want to create a bunch of forms of, some of these mechanisms for participation, and try to attract to the place because presumably there wouldn't, I don't know how many people there would be living there to begin with, but people who are like really interested in experimenting with different ways of living, but I would also try to attract like a swath of people who were interested, like have some industry that wasn't just attracting people who were interested in those experiments, but like just a broad swath of people and something that would be kind of touristic so that because you'd want to have a rotating cast of people coming through and seeing what it's like there and
Okay.
bringing it back to other societies. So like I
So it's like
really
a
love the
plurality network state, essentially.
yeah, well, I really like the idea of Epcot. So,
Okay.
Epcot Center in Disney originally was experimental prototype community of tomorrow, and the idea is that the employees of the Magic Kingdom would live there, and then there would be a rotating cast of people coming through who would be visiting and seeing the different experiments they were doing and learning from them, and then you know uh, taking those seeds of those back. And it didn't quite work out that way. And now it's even less so. But like, I thought that was a great idea. That's kind of my ideal is that like you have some relatively normal people, you have some people interested in the experiments, and then you have a rotating cast of people coming through, getting a flavor of that and taking those seeds back to their homes.
So I wouldn't necessarily have a specific kind of democracy, but would be experimenting with a bunch of different kinds.
Yeah, and I think I would love to try all of those experiments that I was just describing, there. Like I think those are all really good ideas to try, but I'm sure there's others that I haven't thought of, and that's why we made the book open, that other people could throw things in there.
Yeah. So if you okay, so you're 1 year running this Epcot
I'm sorry
plurality.
I'm moving out, but I'm trying to find a charger because my phone is going to die if I don't plug it in somewhere. So
Okay. Get a
let me see
charger.
whether this works.
Okay.
Did that get it charging? No. Yes. Okay, I got it charging. There we
Okay.
go.
Sweet. Okay, so it's 1 year after you founded your Epcot plurality government.
Yeah.
Um, and they have to elect their new leader. Are they going to use quadratic voting to do it? Or will there even be a
Well,
leader?
well, first of all, I'm not sure there needs to be a leader if it's successful,
Okay.
Like certainly not one leader. I mean, you think about a neural network. Like a neural network has like, outputs that are connected to like a bunch of nodes, and those nodes are connected to a bunch of nodes, and a bunch of nodes are connected to those nodes, and some people, maybe Curtis and others would be like, but there's no accountability. Like, who do I fire if things go wrong? And that's just not how a neural network works. Like a neural network works like if something goes wrong, then there's some distributed adjustment of all the things and that gets propagated down. And like I think that's probably how a well-functioning system should work. Like you don't just like cut off someone's head. It's like, what does that do? You just get another person who's probably equally incompetent. Um, Whereas like if you actually tune a system to work better, then everything starts working better.
Okay. You're framing it off of a neural network in that there are a lot of different hubs of leadership, not just one. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, and when something goes right or wrong, like there's accountability to all the elements in proportion to the contribution that they made to the right or wrong decision, rather than just chopping off the head of like one person in charge.
Okay. So if I come and live in this network, I can be part of one of the various leadership kind of basically hider model here where we're in a bunch of small groups all participating. Does that
Yeah,
mean?
and
Okay.
and maybe you're part of each one of them to some extent, and
Okay.
so forth. There's not like it's not just one thing and one accountable person. It's like a bunch of distributed participation, but dynamic and constantly adjusting so that it can learn and improve.
Okay. So if I want to make a change to the government, I don't like the way that it's functioning or it's becoming chaotic. What can I do?
Well, you may be on the committee for something, uh, or on several committees, And so then it would ask you, I mean, if it was a neural network structure, not saying that that's, the only one, but then you would basically be like weighing in on some aspect rather than on the whole. Like, you know, uh, how do we define, um, the subway coordination protocol, and maybe that's something about. And so then you would give input towards improving that based on, what you're observing. And maybe there was another, and together those things would all eventually influence something, but you'd see material feedback on the element that you were talking about rather than just, thumbs up or thumbs down on the whole darn thing, which I think is not very useful. Like, is the US working or not working? Like, we can have a debate about that, right? But uh, like, it's usually going to be like relative to what alternative and whatever is going to be the most productive debate. And so it's, if you get down into more specific things, rather than just saying, throw out Biden, put in Trump, you know what I mean? Often you'll be able to improve the functioning of the system more.
Okay. And is this happening online, or are we doing little town halls everywhere in person, or how are we working as community?
Probably some of each, depending on the nature of the issue. So my guess is that like doing an in-depth deep dive with a small number of people over an extended period of time in an empathetic way is like really important for emotive social issues. And for like more like performance reviews and like sensing, it's like more important to have like low latency, high volume. And so each one of these things should probably have its own structure, depending on the type of thing we're talking about. And then for things that require like lots of imagination and that are very ambitious, probably some kind of, virtual reality, computer aided design structure makes more sense.
Okay. Um, I can't help but think of, did you ever read about the Matera experiment?
No,
Now I'm forgetting what it was called the Unmonastery.
no,
Um, the concept was a bunch of they had a digital online community, and Matera, this town in Italy, was going to reinvent themselves to become one of the um, some European designation, and so this community
capital
kind
of
of.
culture maybe or something
Yeah,
like that.
capital of
Or yeah,
culture. Matera is
yeah,
known for capital of culture. They were the capital of culture in 2019, but so leading up to it, this group moved to Matera in 2014 and ran their own kind of government there based on online input and people
yeah.
trying to online create what the community should be. It was ultimately very not successful
I see.
because the people that moved in did not speak Italian, and the people that lived in Italy were like, we don't want it run like a this internet state,
Yeah,
and the internet state was like kind of very not organized, and it kind of did devolve into like people fighting over how things should be run and not taking into
yeah,
consideration the local population at all.
yeah,
So how would you kind of adjust for some of the challenges, because I have to admit it's hard for me to place the idea of a neural network onto people. So um unless we're like the whole community is working for the government and we're all on committees, I
yeah,
imagine we're not all going to be that involved.
yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, uh, you need to create some incentive system where people can benefit,
From
and have a
participating.
sustainable life from participating. And it has to pay the system to do that. So, like, it has to be commensurate with the value that those people are adding.
Okay.
Um, and ultimately, like, we are, working through neural networks, and neural networks are increasingly doing things, and they're doing them based on our data, but we're not being compensated for that, and we're not aware of the influence that we have. And, so we need to bridge the gap between these simplistic real world systems and then these really sophisticated things that feel like black box external entities. We need to feel, we need to get a better sense of how we're shaping these things that are out there having huge effects already. and we need to um, come to feel more agency and participation in them. And at the same time, we need to realize that these things do work really well and deliver really cool outcomes. So if we made more of our governmental systems work like that, maybe we'd be more satisfied with the outcomes we got. And eventually, I hope between all those dynamics, we can get to something like, what I'm imagining, but not through a jump, through a process of coming to understand them better.
Okay. So maybe we all have a job working 20 hours a week, but we can volunteer for the government another 10 hours a week and get paid for it and provide our input on the subject area where we have
Yeah.
expertise.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, like another example like this is that, right now you like do these 120-hour courses and like turn in homework and then you get a degree and then that affects the rest of your life. But imagine if you could get lots of little micro credentials
Mhm.
for mastering little skills. And then if you could get like meso credentials for like combinations of micro credentials, and then uh, onwards to something that really adds up to something that can affect your career. And um, that is like a neural network, right? Like you have like linear combinations of little things going into bigger things, doing bigger things. And that's just like a social structure that then mirrors the structure of a neural network. I think that would probably work a lot better than our current educational credentialing system does. Um, but it would be a system structured more like the way that our advanced technologies work.
Okay, I like that. I like the micro credentialing a lot. That's awesome. We could all be accumulating lots of different expertises.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Um, anything that you really inspires you out in the real world right now that you would take into this community?
Well, I mean, you gave the examples from Singapore. I love what India has done in terms of digital public infrastructure. I think that's super cool, and it's had a transformative effect there. You think about the crypto space, there's like, billions and billions and billions of dollars that have gone into it. Probably digital public infrastructure in India has had like tens of millions of dollars of funding, and it's transformed the lives of way more people than has crypto, even though they have the same goals. So I'm very inspired by that example.
What is
Um,
the India project?
so they have something called India Stack, which is basically an identity, payments, and data sharing infrastructure. And it's paid for, supported by the government, but um, run by the civil sector. And it's like basically taking digital payments from like 10% of transactions in India to like 95% in like, 3 years, basically. Um, and crypto has like taken digital transaction, like 1% of all transactions are like crypto, in the world. So uh, it's and at much lower cost. So that's super cool example that I'd like to um, imitate.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, that's great. I really love the vision and I
Yeah.
appreciate you continually experimenting with trying to make the vision the reality. What's next for you? What are you excited about in your work coming up?
Well, I'm doing a lot of stuff about trying to bring religion into the tech world. I'm actually about to go right after this to a conference called Imago Dei in the Algorithmic Society. So the people in the image of God and the Algorithmic Society and Christianity and AI. So I'm doing a bunch of work in that space. And then I'm doing a bunch of work on trying to reform social media. And then I'm making movies about telling the story of Taiwan and some of these places so that people can understand the set of possibilities better.
Cool. Well, I'm very interested in especially the religion project and the social media project. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to learn more about that. Is there a place I can follow both of those projects or?
Yeah, we'll have a bunch of things coming out soon. We'll have a blog post coming out at Microsoft, and then I'll be doing a bunch of talks about it. And then social media project. Yeah, hopefully there's a piece in Noema that you can read about the idea, and hopefully we're
Mhm.
gonna have a bunch of prototypes. We're working with Blue Sky and BitChute, and there's already been a little bit on X that has already been implemented, where they're tagging content with like whether it's bringing people together. So all those are great.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay, sweet. I'll take a look. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being part
Oh,
of
it's my
the
pleasure.
conversation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
loved it.
Take
Um,
care, Al.
yeah, thanks. And for everybody that's listening, I will post the recording of this early next week. Thank
Live
you all
long
for
and prosper.
participating. Exactly. Bye, everyone.
Bye.